I didn't even want to go. The email arrived at exactly 9:47 a.m. Subject line: Dinner with the Martins, Friday, 7 p.m. A formal invite from HR, complete with a little smiley face emoji as if that softened anything. After 25 years of building BrightPath Innovations from a tiny consulting firm in a shared co-working space to a $150 million software company with Fortune 500 clients, I wasn't being summoned to a board meeting or a strategy session. No, I was being called to dinner with the CEO and his family. My name is Evelyn Grant, and I was the first employee ever hired at BrightPath. I wasn't just part of the company, I was the company. Back when we had 2 clients and a second-hand copier that only worked if you kicked it twice, I built the project systems, negotiated vendor contracts, ran HR until we could afford a director, and pitched deals that kept the lights on. The founder, Robert Martin, used to call me his steady anchor. He once said I kept the company grounded when everything else felt like it was slipping away. But lately, I'd noticed the shift. Robert had grown distant. My reports were skimmed, not read. Our standing Tuesday meetings turned into occasional calls, then texts. Then came the new hires, fresh grads, loud, confident, tossing around buzzwords like candy. I could feel the chill coming before the window opened. So when the dinner invite arrived, I knew. I just didn't know how cold it would be. The restaurant was one of those chic rooftop spots in downtown Chicago, all sleek decor and overpriced sea base. I wore a deep green blouse and the gold necklace my son gave me last Christmas. Polished, executive, just as I always had been. Robert stood waiting by a long white table, alongside his wife Linda and their daughter Sloane. Sloane looked like she'd stepped out of a glossy magazine ad, blonde, poised, not a wrinkle in sight. In her cream power suit, she was the living definition of a LinkedIn CEO post. Evelyn. Robert beamed, arms open. So glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it, I said smoothly, sliding into my seat across from him. My stomach twisted into a knot. Dinner started the way executive dinners do. Too much wine, too many hollow compliments. Sloane asked about the company's early years, her tone light but tinged with condescension. It's so wild picturing you all working out of some little office back then, she giggled. I smiled. It wasn't quite so funny at the time. Robert cleared his throat. Actually, Evelyn saved us more than once in those days. She closed the contract that landed us our first major client. Sloane smirked. Well, every company needs its building blocks. I should have walked out then. But I stayed. I wanted to see just how far they'd push this. Midway through the main course, sea bass over risotto, Robert folded his hands on the table like a man making a peace offering. Evelyn, he began, voice gentle, we've been doing some long-term planning. You've been essential in building BrightPath into what it is today. Here it comes. But as we chart the next chapter, we believe it's time to bring in new leadership. Fresh energy, fresh ideas. I kept my face calm. Robert smiled proudly. Sloane just wrapped up the Wharton Executive Leadership Program. She has incredible ideas: AI, digital transformation, rebranding. Impressive, I said evenly. What's the transition plan? He let out a breath, relieved. 6 weeks. She'll shadow you. We'll announce it after the next investor call. That's when Sloane leaned forward, a fork in her hand, eyes glinting. Time to pass the torch, Evelyn, she said with a sugary smile. Let us bring BrightPath into the future. The table went quiet. Even Linda froze, her wine glass halfway to her lips. I looked at Sloane, then Robert, and gave a small, cool smile. Of course, I said. Because they didn't know one thing. Back in 2001, when the company was on the brink, Robert gave me 6% equity in lieu of a raise. And unlike everyone else, I had never cashed it out. They had forgotten, but I hadn't. And I was about to remind them. We'll handle the formal announcement after the quarterly update, Robert said smoothly. And of course, there's a generous package. We truly want you to feel valued. That's when Sloane leaned in, fork delicately poised. eyes gleaming with the excitement of someone who thought she'd just won the game. "Time to pass the baton, Evelyn," she said with a sly grin. "Let the new generation show you how it's done." The table fell into an awkward hush. Even Linda's wineglass paused midair. I held Sloane's gaze for a long moment, then offered a calm, measured smile. "Absolutely understand," I murmured. Because what they didn't know, what never crossed their minds to check, was that BrightPath wasn't just a company I helped mold. It was a company I partially owned. Robert had handed me 6% equity back in 2001 when we were one project away from collapse. It was a late night, after I'd pulled off a last-minute save on a critical client deal. Robert had shuffled into my office, eyes weary, holding a single sheet of paper. "Evelyn," he'd said softly, "I can't pay you what you're worth right now, but if we get through this, I want you to have a real stake." At the time, I'd barely skimmed it. It felt more like a handwritten thank you note than a contract. I was bone-tired, loyal, and too hopeful for my own good. Years later, when the company incorporated and outside investors came in, I'd had a lawyer review everything I'd signed. That's when I learned it wasn't a symbolic gesture, it was real equity. With voting rights, ownership, power. I'd never flaunted it. I didn't need to. For years, I was the company's backbone. But over time, BrightPath changed. And so did Robert. The person who used to seek my advice began chasing every new trend. Buzzwords replaced strategy. Consultants rotated in and out, but the ones who complemented Sloane's Instagram-ready leadership style stuck around. Suddenly, loyalty and confidence weren't the currency of value, appearance was. And I no longer fit the aesthetic. The following Monday, I strolled into the office as if nothing had happened. I smiled at the receptionist, grabbed my usual cup of black coffee from the break room Keurig, and settled into my desk. My system access was still fully functional. No company-wide email. No formal announcement. Just an uneasy silence. Jared, our lead developer, popped his head into my office with a concerned look. "Everything okay, Evelyn?" he asked carefully. I gave a small nod. "Just dinner with the Martins." He winced. Words already spreading. "People are confused." I met his gaze. "Let them wonder." I wasn't ready to play my hand. Not yet. Instead, I logged into the shareholder portal. Sure enough, my 6% sat there, intact. And thanks to recent funding rounds, that slice had matured into something meaningful. I downloaded everything: shareholder agreements, board voting records, compensation packages. Then I walked over to Robert's assistant. "Could you book me 30 minutes with Robert? Private." She blinked in surprise but nodded. "I'll arrange it." By Wednesday, I found myself seated across from Robert in his sleek corner office overlooking the Chicago skyline. "Evelyn," he greeted, mustering a thin smile. "How are things?" "Interesting," I replied calmly. "You forgot to mention the equity I still hold." His smile twitched at the edges, a flash of discomfort crossing his face. "I assumed you'd cashed out by now," he murmured. "I haven't." I placed a copy of the shareholder agreement on his desk. "And unless I'm misunderstanding, I still retain full voting rights." Robert folded his hands, the mask slipping for the briefest second. "Evelyn, let's not make this complicated," he said softly. "We're offering you a very fair exit." "I'm not leaving, at least not yet," I said coolly. "I'm willing to help with the transition. But if Sloane plans to tear apart the company's foundation, restructure teams, or outsource core operations, I will have a voice in that." Robert's brows furrowed. "You're holding on out of nostalgia." I smiled faintly. "No, Robert. I'm holding on to what I built." Before he could speak, I rose from the chair. "Let's both think about what comes next." And I walked out, leaving him to sit with the weight of what he'd overlooked. Robert rubbed his temples. "Evelyn, let's not make this messy. We're giving you an excellent exit package." "I'm not stepping away just yet," I said smoothly. "I'll help with the transition. I'll do it with professionalism. But if Sloane plans to overhaul the company, swap out the team, or sell off key operations, I expect to have input. His mouth tightened. You're clinging to the past. No, I replied quietly. I'm protecting what I created. Before he could form another argument, I stood and left the room, leaving him to sit with the reality he'd overlooked. That evening, at home in my study, I pulled open the bottom drawer of an old oak filing cabinet. Tucked inside were relics of BrightPath's earliest days, scribbled notes from client meetings, whiteboard snapshots printed on photo paper, even the original product wireframes drawn on coffee shop napkins. And then I found it. An NDA Robert had signed back in 2002, acknowledging that several of the tools I'd introduced to BrightPath had originated from my previous consultancy, intellectual property I'd brought in, documented, and protected. It was the sort of detail most executives forget. But I don't forget. The next morning, I met Carla, an old friend and now a highly respected IP attorney, at a cozy cafe near the BrightPath office. Over cappuccinos, I laid everything out on the table. Can I shield this? I asked quietly. Carla's eyes sparkled as she skimmed the paperwork. Evelyn, you don't just have protection, you have leverage. I let out a long, slow breath, the weight of 25 years pressing down on my shoulders. They saw me as a placeholder. Let's remind them, Carla said with a grin, that foundations are stronger than facades. By the end of the week, the rumors were everywhere. Why is Evelyn still here? Why is she so calm? Why hasn't Sloane fully taken over? I walked through the office halls, nodding politely at whispers, a small smile playing at my lips. They had invited me to dinner to close my chapter. They didn't realize I was already drafting the sequel. By Monday, Sloane was unofficially camped in my office. She arrived early, balancing 2 lattes, offering a forced smile as if we were old friends. Her tone dripped with sugar, but her questions were sharp. So, Evelyn, she said one morning, scanning a report she barely grasped, do you really approve all the budget requests yourself? Always, I answered evenly. It prevents errors. Automation can't catch everything. But if we implement predictive tools are only as strong as the data you feed them, I replied smoothly. And many of our legacy clients are still on systems that are over a decade old. Garbage in, garbage out. She blinked, clearly unfamiliar with the nuances, then forced another tight smile. You're a little old school, huh? There it was. I just smiled. Old school kept this company alive through 3 downturns. But you're welcome to learn by trial. Her smile faltered slightly. By Wednesday, Sloane scheduled her first strategy meeting without me. Invitations went out to every executive, except me. Jared, our developer, quietly forwarded me the invite. Thought you'd want to see this. The subject line read, BrightPath 2.0, our future starts now. Charming. I opened the agenda. New branding campaigns, restructuring operations, potential outsourcing of back-end support. I laughed softly at my desk. Outsourcing back-end? Half of BrightPath's reputation was built on back-end support. Our clients didn't flock to us for sleek dashboards. They came because we kept their systems running when others abandoned them. Sloane didn't understand the heart of this company. She only knew the polished surface. And that, I thought, was her first mistake. She only knew of the company, the glossy version her father liked to describe over weekend brunches. That same afternoon, Robert strolled over to my workspace, something he hadn't done in ages. Evelyn, he said smoothly, putting on that well-worn diplomatic voice. I just want to make sure this transition goes smoothly. Sloane's really gaining momentum. Visibility doesn't equal understanding, I replied evenly. He hesitated, the faintest crack in his polished tone. You've always been the heart of this company. I tilted my head slightly. You invited me to that dinner to pull the heart right out of it. Robert flinched, just a flicker. That's not what this is. Then explain it, I pressed. Because I designed the systems, reassured the investors, and studied this company when you were off in Napa taking leadership retreats. Silence. I know about the series D negotiations, I added quietly. You're grooming BrightPath for acquisition. His eyes flicked up, startled. How? I've been here long enough to read the signs. He didn't deny it. He just stared at the floor, shoulders slightly slumped. We had to make tough calls. The board wanted a fresh face, a new narrative. A narrative that didn't have me in it, I said flatly. He let out a slow exhale. We're offering you a generous severance. I'm not after your severance, I said as I stood. I'm after what I'm entitled to. I walked away before he could respond. Back in my office, I pulled up my laptop and typed an email to Carla. I wanted the provisional patents filed by week's end, not just the early frameworks, but every upgrade, every refinement I'd personally designed. I wasn't trying to wreck the company. I was marking my ground. Anything tied to my expertise would be protected. The next morning, I spotted Sloane at the whiteboard, sketching out a new client engagement strategy. My eyes narrowed. It was lifted almost word for word from a planning document I'd authored 7 years prior. She must have gone archive diving. When she caught me watching, she offered a polished smile. I'm just bringing things up to date, she chirped. Your materials were a great launchpad. No problem, I said coolly, stepping closer. Just be sure to cite your references. Uncredited borrowing doesn't look good in quarterly reports. Her smile twitched ever so slightly. By Friday, the office was abuzz with murmurs. Vanessa, my longtime operations manager, pulled me aside near the break room. People are uneasy, she said under her breath. Sloane's pushing through some pretty reckless changes. And Robert's quiet. He's no longer steering the ship, I said softly. He just hasn't admitted it to himself. Vanessa gave me a wary glance. What's your move, Evelyn? I offered a small smile. Setting the table. For what? For the storm, I said calmly. But don't worry. I plan to watch it with a smile. That evening, I sat on my porch, laptop balanced on my knees, a glass of Cabernet at my side. My drafts were ready. One email to the 3 remaining board members, reminding them of my equity stake and the original shareholder clause requiring unanimous consent for major structural shifts. Another to the CEO of Summit Core Solutions, a company we'd nearly partnered with last year and one that was gaining ground fast. We'd always had a respectful rapport. I requested a meeting. And a final email to myself, subject line, leverage. A neat folder of contracts, patents, and agreements, all backed up and safely stored. I didn't want to fight. I wanted acknowledgement. But if they kept pushing, they'd see just how old school I could be. The official announcement came Tuesday morning, mandatory all-staff meeting. Sloane took the stage, wireless mic in hand, pacing with the confidence of a keynote speaker. Behind her, a presentation flickered, brimming with stock photos and abstract slogans. Inspire, innovate, elevate. Robert introduced her warmly, calling her a refreshing new leader. Sloane beamed like she'd just been crowned. Then she turned to the crowd and said it. It's time for a new chapter. A younger, leaner, more innovative BrightPath. There it was, not even a hint of subtlety. I sat in the second row, arms folded across my chest, watching the room around me. Faces stiffened. Vanessa looked down at her hands. Jared stared at his shoes. Sloane was writing her grand opening. But she hadn't realized yet I was already preparing the next act. I scanned the room, reading the tension in every face. Most tried to disguise their unease. Vanessa sat frozen, her expression tight with shock. Jared avoided my gaze entirely. Then Sloane gestured smoothly toward the screen, and a new slide appeared in bold letters. Operational Streamlining Initiative, Phase 1. My jaw stiffened. The details flashed on the screen: downsizing back-end teams, outsourcing IT functions, consolidating departments, and most damning of all, leadership modernization, code for phasing me out. They didn't even have the decency to say my name. After the meeting, Sloane intercepted me in the hallway, walking with that polished confidence. I trust you'll handle this with grace, she murmured, her voice smooth. It's what people expect from Veterans. I raised an eyebrow. You mean the woman who outlasted 3 CEOs and architected the systems this place runs on? She didn't reply, just offered a faint smile, as if I were being stubborn. That afternoon, HR delivered the formal separation documents, a check with plenty of zeros, an NDA, and a clause requiring my cooperation in a full knowledge transfer. That's when they crossed the line. I walked straight into Robert's office, the thick envelope in hand. He looked up, clearly anticipating this moment. "Evelyn," he began carefully. "You let your daughter stand in front of the company and claim this was her vision," I said coldly. "You let her call me obsolete in front of the people I trained. And now you want me to hand over my work like a loyal old dog. It's not like that." "It's exactly like that," I cut in sharply. "And let me be clear, I'm not signing this. Not today. Not ever." He exhaled, shoulders sinking. "Then you're leaving us no choice." "You're forgetting something," I said calmly, slipping a document from my bag onto his desk. "I still hold a seat on the board. You pushed me out without proper approval, and you're breaching the original agreements." Robert's face drained of color. "Sloane's ideas might sound sleek and modern," I continued, "but they're reckless. Stripping back-end support will fracture the infrastructure. And that shiny predictive automation she's championing? It violates key client contracts, you know that." He leaned back in his chair, silent. "I'm not here to tank the ship," I added softly. "But I won't go down with it either." That evening, I met Vanessa and Jared at a quiet cafe across town. I slid 2 large folders across the table. "What's this?" Vanessa asked cautiously. "Proof," I answered. "What we've built over the years isn't just code. It's intellectual property. Documented, time-stamped, protected." Jared frowned. "Are you planning to sue them?" "Not unless they force me," I said quietly. "But I want you both shielded. Sloane's already preparing a second wave of cuts." Vanessa's shoulders tensed. "PR's drafting statements. They're packaging BrightPath for sale." "Exactly," I nodded. "They're turning it into a polished, saleable product." Jared looked up, his voice hesitant. "Are you going to stop it?" "No," I murmured. "I'm going to shape it." Over the next 3 days, I worked in near silence, steady, meticulous, invisible. I met with Carla again, filing a cease and desist to block the reuse of proprietary modules Sloane had copied into her rollout plans. I sent a formal letter to the board, stating my intention to vote against the restructuring unless an independent third-party audit was conducted. And I had lunch with the CEO of Summit Core Solutions, just a friendly conversation. But when I mentioned BrightPath's recent shakeups, his brows lifted with interest. "They're gearing up for a sale," I said evenly. He nodded slowly, the wheels already turning behind his calm expression. "That would explain why some of your team has been reaching out to us," the CEO of Summit Core, David Reynolds, said thoughtfully. I offered a small, knowing smile. "If you're interested, I can tell you which systems you'll want to protect, and more importantly, who here actually understands them." By Friday, the pressure had clearly reached Sloane. Her tone in meetings had sharpened. The once flawless smiles had thinned into forced expressions. The confidence she paraded only days before had started to unravel, and the team she assumed would follow her was beginning to look elsewhere, mostly at me. I didn't gloat. I simply smiled. The storm she thought she'd unleashed? I had already built the levees. By Monday, 3 of Sloane's high-profile initiatives had crumbled. The vendor migration she promised would slash expenses was stalled thanks to technical hurdles. Translation: Jared had quietly disabled a critical compatibility patch he designed years ago. Her rebranding push hit a legal wall when the attorneys flagged the proposed name for infringing on a smaller firm's trademark, a firm whose CEO just happened to owe me a favor. I may have placed a discreet call. And the much-hyped predictive analytics rollout? It buckled the minute it touched live client data. As I'd warned, bad data leads to bad results. But Sloane wasn't one to back down. She doubled her efforts. That afternoon, she summoned all department heads to an urgent alignment session. Her voice was clipped, her polished demeanor strained. "We're experiencing some growing pains," she announced, pacing at the front of the room. "But we're headed in the right direction. Disruption is rarely smooth." From my seat near the back, I raised an eyebrow. "Disruption only works if you've got a safety net. You've cut everyone this company had." Her smile twitched. "Thank you for your input, Evelyn." Robert sat nearby, slumped in his chair, his gaze unfocused. His role had shrunk to that of a passive observer, watching his daughter steer the company toward an iceberg. After the meeting, Vanessa pulled me aside. Her voice was low, worried. "3 of our oldest clients called today," she murmured. "They're anxious. One's threatening to pull their contract if service drops again." I nodded. "And I'm guessing Sloane hasn't replied to their emails." "She's convinced they'll wait." "They won't." That night, I sat on my back porch, laptop open on the table, a cup of chamomile tea at my elbow. I drafted a short email to David Reynolds. Subject: follow-up from our conversation. Body: if your board is still serious, now is the window. Summit Core's leadership had been circling BrightPath for months, waiting for the right moment. I wasn't planning to wreck anything, but I was ready to hold up the mirror. The next morning, I found Sloane in my former office, feet on the desk, bouncing a stress ball against the wall. She didn't glance up when I knocked. "Something you need?" she asked coolly, like I was an intern. "I'd like a few minutes," I said evenly. She sighed dramatically. "Make it quick." I stepped inside, calm and steady. "You're losing control of the company." That got her attention. She sat forward, the ball still in her hand. "I know you think buzzwords and flashy branding will win people over. But BrightPath wasn't built on slogans. It was built on relationships, trust, and systems that actually function." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" "No," I said softly. "I'm giving you a chance." "A chance for what?" "To stop pretending you know what you're doing." She gave a sharp laugh, but it was brittle. "My father's being sidelined by the board." "And you're on the same track," I replied calmly. "You're a figurehead now, just like he is." Her bravado wavered. For the first time, she really looked at me. "You want to lead?" I continued. "Fine. Lead. But don't burn the foundation down just to prove you can light a match." She said nothing. I hadn't expected her to. That afternoon, Robert asked to meet privately, no assistant, no Sloane. When I stepped into his office, the exhaustion was etched deep in his face. "Evelyn," he sighed, lowering himself into the chair across from me. "What is it that you want?" I drew in a steady breath. "I want acknowledgement. Not a payoff, not a promotion, just recognition." He rubbed his temples, eyes shadowed. "The board is rattled. They're seeing the cracks. They know your name is woven into every key system." "They should be rattled," I said softly. They handed a multi-million-dollar company to someone who thinks experience is a liability. "And Summit Core?" he asked quietly, his voice almost tentative. I offered a small smile. "I had lunch with David. The interest is real. But I haven't made a decision." For the first time in months, Robert looked at me, really looked at me. "You could walk away from all of this," he said, almost like a confession. I could, I agreed. But I won't. Because what I built matters. And if they want to keep using it, they're going to do it on my terms. That evening, my phone buzzed. Vanessa's text was short but pointed. Client X just sent a formal letter of concern to the board. I texted back 2 words, "Hold steady." Sloane may have had the microphone, but I had the audience. And in a few more moves, I'd be the one holding the pen. The boardroom was packed not just with bodies, but with tension. The kind of tension that hums in the air, where no one dares shift in their chair or clear their throat. It was Thursday. An emergency meeting. The CEO, board members, department heads, and me. Robert sat at the end of the polished table, looking like he'd aged a decade in just a few weeks. Sloane perched beside him, nervously flipping through a sleek leather planner, though the pages inside were blank of anything useful. Across the room sat David Reynolds, Summit Core's CEO, wearing the cool, measured expression of a man weighing whether to invest or walk away. Celeste, the board chairwoman, cleared her throat. Before we proceed, we need to address the central issue. She glanced in my direction. Evelyn has brought forward several matters, legal, technical, and operational, that were not disclosed during our internal review of BrightPath's leadership transition. Murmurs rippled down the table. Robert's face was unreadable. Sloane gave me a sharp, sideways glance, her bravado visibly cracking. Celeste went on, as outlined in the original shareholder agreement, any restructuring of executive leadership impacting stakeholders holding more than 3% requires unanimous board consent. She turned to me. Evelyn, would you like to speak? I rose calmly. No rush. No anger. Just resolve. I'm not here to dismantle this company, I began. That's never been my goal. I've dedicated 25 years of my life to BrightPath, and somewhere along the way, that dedication was mistaken for something disposable. I didn't look at Sloane, I didn't need to. I felt her tension. I don't want a title. I don't need a corner office. But I do want my work respected, and I want whoever steps into leadership to understand that innovation without a foundation is just chaos dressed up in new packaging. The room fell into a heavy, still silence. Finally, David Reynolds spoke, his voice calm but firm. We've been monitoring this closely, he said, his eyes sweeping the room. And we've seen the ripple effects. 3 major clients have already raised concerns. His gaze flicked briefly toward Sloane, who stiffened in her chair. David folded his hands neatly. We're still interested. But let me be clear, our offer is contingent on leadership stability. And the current plan doesn't reflect that. The message was unmistakable. And Sloane knew it. 2 clients have frozen contract renewals, David continued, his voice steady, and internal assessments show that BrightPath's core systems are far less self-sufficient than reported. His gaze shifted to Sloane. She stiffened, eyes wide. David turned back to the board. Our offer is still on the table, but it hinges on stable, competent leadership. Frankly, we won't move forward if the current transition plan remains. In plain terms, Sloane was done. Robert opened his mouth, but Celeste, the board chair, raised a hand. Let's take a 10-minute recess. The room stirred as people stood, murmuring quietly while they shuffled into the hallway. I remained seated. So did Sloane. For a long moment, she just looked at me, not the practiced corporate glance, but a raw, unguarded stare. I didn't mean to wreck anything, she said softly, voice barely audible. I met her gaze. I understand you wanted to prove yourself. But you came in swinging without asking what we were fighting for. You treated people like roadblocks, and you treated me like a relic. She swallowed hard. What happens now? I leaned slightly forward. That's no longer in my hands. It's up to the board. 10 minutes later, we filed back in. Celeste stood calmly, her voice composed. Effective immediately, Sloane Martin is relieved of all transition responsibilities. Robert Martin will serve in an advisory role through the acquisition period. She turned to me. Evelyn Grant will lead the transitional advisory team, reporting directly to the board and our prospective partners at Summit Core. I didn't smile. I simply gave a quiet nod. Later that week, I signed the consulting agreement, triple my previous compensation, complete decision-making authority over system integrations, and autonomy throughout the acquisition process. Sloane left quietly, no farewell memo, no last meeting, no hallway goodbyes. Robert approached me in the lobby one final time, extending his hand. I'm sorry, he said softly. I know, I answered. 2 months later, BrightPath officially became part of Summit Core. Most of the employees stayed on. I personally selected a new leadership lineup. Vanessa stepped into the role of operations director, and Jared was promoted to head of engineering. Nearly half the company now reported to individuals I had mentored and trusted. And I didn't return to my old office. Instead, I worked remotely from a small home studio overlooking the lake. Twice a week, I'd stand on the deck barefoot, coffee mug in hand, watching the sun rise as the client dashboards I designed ran smoothly in the background. The systems I had built continued to hum, steady as ever. One quiet evening, an email arrived from Celeste. Subject: Legacy, Evelyn. What you accomplished, and the grace with which you handled it, we've never seen anything like it. You didn't just protect your legacy. You showed us what authentic leadership really is. I sat there for a long while, eyes resting on the screen. It was never about revenge. It was never about control. It was about worth. Knowing it, owning it, and never letting anyone strip it away. Thank you for standing with me through this journey. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have walked away quietly or stood your ground to protect what you built? Tell me what you think, because your voices, your insights, matter to me more than you know. Here's the truth I learned. Value isn't just about titles, money, or recognition. It's about knowing your worth, owning it fully, and refusing to let anyone erase it. That's the heart of this story. So many of us, especially as we get older, are told we've had our time or that we need to step aside for the new generation. But experience isn't a flaw. It's a foundation. We carry knowledge, resilience, and perspective that can't be taught in a classroom or captured in a trendy slogan. I want you to remember that the next time someone tries to make you feel small or invisible, here's my advice. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself, even when it's uncomfortable. Protect what you've built, whether that's your career, your family, or your personal integrity. You don't have to fight with anger or bitterness. You can do it with calm, steady resolve. Speak up, hold your ground, and remind the world that you still have a seat at the table. And most importantly, don't measure your value by how loud the world claps for you. Measure it by how true you stay to yourself. So, if this story resonated with you, hit that like button, share your advice in the comments, and let's keep this conversation going. Because together, we remind each other, our voices still matter. And we're not done yet.